Hey everybody, it's Jenna. I'm here to talk about something that somehow keeps coming up over and over again. What is going on with the future Batman movies? The Batman Part 2, Matt Reeves' big screen follow-up to 2022's The Batman and 2024's The Penguin series, is currently scheduled to be released on October 1st, 2027, after a number of release date delays for a number of various reasons, including the 2023 Hollywood strikes. DC Studios CEOs James Gunn and Peter Safran told reporters in February of this year that Reeves was still actively working on the script, and that although he had, quote, yet to turn in a full script, what we have read so far is incredibly encouraging. Robert Pattinson, who stars in the titular role, most recently revealed in an interview that the plan is for the sequel to film by the end of 2025. Over in another corner is The Brave and the Bold, a new reboot of Batman that was announced in early 2023 as part of Gunn and Safran's plans for their new interconnected DC universe. It aims to be centered around the extended Bat family of sidekicks and other heroes, and particularly Damian Wayne, the youngest Robin and biological son of Bruce Wayne. In February of this year, Gunn and Safran confirmed that there is a screenwriter working on The Brave and the Bold, although they wouldn't say who it is, and that Gunn is, quote, working very closely with them. Andy Muschietti, who was announced to direct the film in the summer of 2023, just before the release of his work on The Flash, is not working with said screenwriter, but, quote, will be the first to see the finished script. The film does not currently have a release date, in part because, as Gunn and Safran have repeatedly stressed, a DC Studios project will not be greenlit or put into production until the script is ready. Even with all of these facts, it feels like a new round of discourse starts up every single week about the fates of these movies. There is an ever-growing theory that The Batman Part 2 will be canceled altogether, or that Pattinson and the universe of the Batman will be retconned into being in the DCU after all. There is also just a lot of weird entitlement around the way that both movies are currently being talked about, either in demanding to know why Matt Reeves is taking so long, demanding that Pattinson become the DCU Batman because they saw a fan art or a fan cam of him next to David Gordon-Sweat's Superman, or in trying to retrofit The Batman Part 2 or Brave and the Bold into a plot that either the fandom or some random scooper account has already put into people's heads. I'm not even going to bring up the specific comments that ultimately led me to make this video, both because I don't want to give them any further oxygen, and because honestly, it feels like a version of this conversation is just going to keep happening over and over again. I've already talked about it a bit in my DC Studios update video from February and on episodes of my podcast Phase Hero, but I want to offer my take right now. Let's start with the possibility of the Batman universe merging into the DCU, even though Gunn and Safran have repeatedly said that that's not currently the plan. Most recently, at the February press event, Gunn said, quote, it's certainly not the plan. Like, it's certainly not the plan. With Safran adding, quote, and we love him, but we gotta introduce a Batman into the DCU. It's imperative, so that's the plan with Brave and the Bold. With Gunn adding, quote, these questions become headlines because they say, have you ever talked about this? We've talked about literally every permutation on the way to come into this job in terms of how we were going to handle it, what actors were going to continue over, what we were going to merge. We've talked about everything. Have we ever talked about Grant Gustin? Yeah. Have we ever talked about Robert Pattinson? Yeah. We've talked about all of those things. But serious conversations? No. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I think it's absolutely impossible or that I wouldn't be excited if it ultimately happened, but if it were to happen, I would trust that it would be the best possible creative decision for all of the parties involved. But at this point, with where both universes are at, it seems like it would create so many more creative headaches than it would potentially solve. The gritty, Nirvana-filled world of the Batman is still in its early stages. Bruce is only a few years into being Batman. Oz Cobb spent 8 episodes of The Penguin getting to the costume and the crime boss archetype that we know from the comics, and other villains like the Riddler or the Joker fit very specific, somewhat realistic archetypes. I've heard the argument that this Gotham could be so in its own lane, it doesn't even acknowledge the magic and kaiju and brightly colored superheroes that exist in other cities, but that could be a slippery slope. Not only would it go against the events of Creature Commandos, which established bioluminescent skeleton men and shape-shifting Xbox gamers already existing in Gotham, but it would box in a lot of things going forward. Even with Matt Reeves indicating for years that he already knows the story arc for a trilogy of Batman movies, a part 2 that's now part of the DCU would fundamentally change how he approaches that. The movie would have to devote at least some time to acknowledging and reminding people that it's now in this larger universe, or it would have to account for Pattinson going off and being in crossovers in between movies. You might hear me say that and think that this wouldn't be the case, but even in a hypothetical dream scenario where Reeves would get to make part 2 and 3 exactly how he wants, with just the larger DCU reacting around it, there would still be a new wave of discourse about connections and timelines and potential plot holes that would overshadow any events of the movies themselves. My husband pointed out that the discourse of why didn't Superman help stop Gotham from flooding would set the internet on fire in and of itself. In the process, it would limit how the sandbox of Gotham and Batman-related stories get to be used in the DCU. Even with the very little that we've seen, the DCU is baking in decades of existing superhero lore, with multiple generations of characters coexisting and working together. Pattinson, meanwhile, ended the events of the Batman just beginning to comfortably trust other people, and it would take decades of runway that we don't have to get to the point of him having having a Bat family and having Damian Wayne. It would, in a way, be the opposite of how boxed in we were with Ben Affleck's Batman in the DCEU. 20 years of sidekicks and pain had already happened off-screen, so there was barely enough runway to introduce any of the family around him, and it just didn't become a priority in the universe. I don't necessarily expect the hypothetical DCU Batman to be 15 or 20 years older than Pattinson, but the current circumstances of the DCU allow him to already have a couple more years under his belt before we even meet him for the first time. It also would allow for the Bat family, characters who continue to be beloved and popular in their own rights, to debut in the DCU on their own terms and with their own stories without everything starting at square one. The fact that Gunn and Safran have been so bullish on introducing that, in part because it might be the first and only opportunity to do so cinematically instead of doing a pastiche of every back-to-basics Batman movie that we've already had, has somehow gotten lost in the shuffle of all of this discourse, which is just wild to me. I think so much of the conversation around these two Batman movies and the fact that it keeps happening seemingly ad nauseum exemplifies so many of the flaws of modern fandom. There's almost this lack of object permanence with regards to reboots or relaunches or projects that may be on the horizon. No matter how comic accurate or passionately made it is, if it doesn't look or sound like something that they've already known or something that they've already written in their heads, then it's immediately put at a disadvantage. Sure, Pattinson's Batman and Corn Sweat Superman might look good next to each other and are already resonating with younger audiences, but the same could be said for a number of previous combinations of Batman and Superman. And parts of the internet only insist that they belong in the same universe because they can't immediately picture what the DCU Batman will look like, as evident by the fact that there are dozens of warring fan casts over who should play the role. We see this lack of object permanence with the endless cycle of nostalgia for pre-MCU Marvel movies, and we're seeing it right now with the sudden hype for the 2000s Fantastic Four movies as a bad knee-jerk reaction to the Fantastic Four first steps being more diverse or more visually distinct or more complex with its characters. We also see it with a certain fandom of a certain previous DC movie, a movie that will always have a special place in my heart for what it's worth because they think that they can restore things if they're loud enough. On that topic, we also see it with superhero movies that, for one reason or another, never get beyond the development stage. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 4, Avengers the Kane Dynasty, and at least a dozen different DCEU projects all come to mind. Parts of the fandom take rumors or concept art or their own imaginations and turn these movies into some perfect white whale that they'll always be bitter got away. Hell, this mindset has even bled over into movies that already exist but might have changed in some way through rewrites or reshoots. As time passes, I feel like the Batman Part 2 is already joining the ranks of these movies, because parts of the fandom can already imagine their perfect version of it, with one of a laundry list of potential villains or a cameo from Corn Sweat Superman, so why is it so hard to just make it a reality? This is completely ignoring the fact that the creative process is hard, and it's also ignoring the fact that behind these pieces of art are real human beings who shouldn't immediately be called liars when they confirm or deny something that doesn't fit with your personal expectations, and who might be going through things in their personal lives that are way more important than the art that they're making. Don't even get me started on the way that AI has led people to casually disregard that human element, because it honestly makes my blood boil. It's also ignoring the fact that plenty of pieces of art, movies, comics, and so many others have taken a bit of time to become a reality, but they're still able to stand on their own as works of art when outside of that echo chamber. Every single time that this Batman discourse starts up again, I worry that the film isn't going to possibly meet every single person's expectations because they keep getting higher and higher, and that the echo chamber is just going to keep getting more and more toxic along the way. But then I remove myself from that echo chamber and, for lack of a better term, go touch grass. And I think back to the much longer hiatuses that we've already had between Batman movies, or the era of the Bat embargo in DC movies and TV shows, or the fact that DC has a history of concurrently publishing multiple fundamentally different takes on Batman in the comics. None of these instances stopped Batman from continuing to be a cultural juggernaut, so waiting a little bit longer than we thought to potentially get two cinematic versions of Batman really close to each other shouldn't either. And in the meantime, we still have multiple incredibly unique projects that are related to Batman and in the works, with Clayface and the animated dynamic duo movie already greenlit at DC Studios, and a Teen Titans movie currently being written. So my advice this week and every future week that this discourse starts back up again would be to just take a second and touch grass. Go read the ever-growing number of Batman comics, both old and new, which are all so different from each other in tone and style that you can definitely find something that you want. Or go support the cast of the Batman by watching their newer work, which I already know that not enough of you did with Mickey 17. And ultimately, just remember that.
None of it is real. It's all just stories that we're telling about characters, and hopefully there's authenticity and truth to those stories.
What do you think of all of this Batman discourse? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends if you haven't already done so. Merch is available, the link in the description. As always, you can find me on social media at Hey It's Jenna Lynn. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, go read some comics.